Is everybody having a good time? My dad would be so happy right now to hear all this laughter. He would be. I mean, that's what he was all about. So, I'm Michael, by the way, for those of you who don't know me. Thank you all for coming today. It really means so much to us. And we're here really to celebrate Marvin's life. And Ariel, I have to say, it hasn't hit me yet either. I don't feel sad. People keep telling me, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm not. I'm so happy for him. He had such a wonderful life, and it ended just the way he wanted it to. So, I mean, yes, I'm sure it will hit me, next week when I go to call him, and all of a sudden I realize, wait a second, I don't have to dial the phone anymore. It's funny, his last words to me on Sunday, I'm not going off speech here, the last words that he said to me, I was sitting next to him holding his hand on Sunday, and I said, Dad, you can let go now. And he said, all right, I'm going to hang up now. And I said, Dad, I'm standing right next to you. And he goes, all right, buddy, I'm going now. Bye, I love you. It was so sweet. And, anybody who knows my relationship with my dad knows how special that was. He was really a good man who deserved the happy, successful life he lived and the peaceful way he died, surrounded by his family. Believe me, I know, Claudia, this is what you said, I know how fortunate we are to have had our father play such a nurturing and meaningful role in our lives for so long. We really did, my dad and I, we shared a special relationship. He was warm and loving, and his sense of humor really did remain intact till the very end. I love this story, and I've told it to a lot of you. My family and I were in Africa in March, and Claudia sends me a note, saying, listen, you're prepared, you may not make it until you get back. So I came back a few days earlier. Much to my oblige. Because we really thought it was the end. So I get there, I come right to the airport, I go running upstairs, and I'm holding his hand, Claudia's holding his other hand, Phyllis is sitting there, we're all sitting around a nice circle, and he says to me, he's having difficulty breathing. Oh, and the doctor had just unhooked his defibrillator so that it wouldn't shock back, and it wouldn't shock him back to life. So he says to you, I want to say something. I've had a wonderful life. I'm now ready to let go. I want you to know how much I love you all. These will be my last words. The three of us watched intently as he closed his eyes and his breathing got shallower. We thought, this is it. A minute went by before he opened his eyes, looked at us with that big smile and said, I'm still here. I guess those weren't my last words. For those of you who didn't know my dad, before he slowed down these last few years, let me tell you a little bit about him. He was a real character, but he never forgot that he grew up as a poor boy in the Bronx. He was an unpretentious guy with eclectic interests. Somehow, the kid from Morris Avenue, who played Ringalivio in stickball, later fell in love with golf and opera. I don't know. He was a proud graduate of DeWitt Clinton High School. His father, Abe, was an uneducated Romanian immigrant who worked 3 jobs. His mother, Betty, was a wonderful woman with an unforgettable personality. Marvin and his brother Norman slept in the same pull-out couch in their living room of their family's 1-bedroom walk-up apartment. Even though he lived in the Bronx and should have been a Yankees fan like all of his other friends, Dad was a huge New York Giants fan because the Giants gave him his first paying job at the age of 10, pushing turnstiles for fans entering the Polo Grounds. He was paid 25 cents a game and allowed to go in and watch the game after the 3rd inning. He was naturally friendly, and as you've heard, he loved to talk to everybody. I have no doubt that his ability to easily befriend people was the single biggest reason for his success that he later enjoyed as an adult in the insurance business. In fact, between the experiences of growing up in the Bronx, his love of sports, and later his 3 years in the Army, Marvin often found something in common to talk about with whoever he would meet. He was equally adept at talking to doormen, some of whom are here today, as he was playing golf with the chairman of large companies. For his entire life, he treated everyone with equal respect, no matter what the person's station in life. The war years really shaped his entire adult life. Dad was a third-year night student at NYU, supported by his brother Norman, when at the age of 19 he enlisted in the Army. He had high hopes to be an officer, but President Roosevelt had other ideas. Marvin ended up in the infantry as a buff private. He was assigned to the 3rd Army 100th Armored Division under General George Patton. He landed in Normandy 100 days after D-Day and fought in northern and eastern France. He was carried off the battlefield with frostbitten feet. This was just on the eve of the famous Battle of the Bulge, where 19,000 Allied soldiers were killed. Marvin spent 8 months in hospitals in France, England, Scotland, and finally back in South Carolina, hoping that his purple feet wouldn't have to be amputated. While he fortunately kept both his feet, he had problems with them his entire life. Rather than feel sorry for himself or complain, he always spoke about how lucky he was that he was hurt before he likely could have been killed. He treasured the friendships that he made in the Army, to those he fought with, to those he played poker with, and to those who he recuperated with in the hospitals. He was able to take advantage of the opportunities available to returning disabled men in 1945. First, he was able to return to NYU and get a free ride under the Army's GI Bill. Second, as one of a handful of disabled soldiers in a country filled with lonely women, there was no shortage of loving support. Later on, he was grateful for the treatment extended to him by the disabled American veterans, and it was Dad's wish that he be buried in a simple coffin today, draped with an American flag. How appropriate that he died on Memorial Day. He was equally grateful for the education he received from NYU. He spent his later years involved with the Alumni Association, the Stern School of Business. In fact, that's how he met Phyllis. After being discharged, Captain Norman and Private Marvin began a business partnership that lasted nearly 50 years. They began their careers buying and selling steel, then ladies' dresses, and finally insurance. Norman was the really smart accountant and the inside guy who ran their business. Marvin was the consummate salesman. Norman was more than just his brother and business partner. They were best friends. The saddest day in Marvin's life was in August of 1995 when Norman unexpectedly passed away. Marvin was never quite the same. Most boys look up to their fathers for advice. What was so unusual about my relationship with my dad is how lucky I was to receive guidance from him well into my mid-50s. I still recall when it was that I first realized the value of listening to his advice. In 1962, Marvin took me to my first baseball game at the Polo Grounds to see the San Francisco Giants play the Mets. Marvin promised me he would show me something that I would never forget. Sure enough, after the last out of the top of the half of the 7th inning, Marvin quickly stood up, motioned with his hands, and started yelling for everybody to stand up and sing. You can imagine my awe when everyone appeared to follow his instructions, stood up, and began to sing "Take Me Out to the Ball Game." That day, I fell in love with baseball, and I truly believed that my dad could do anything. After he retired from the insurance business, Marvin moved into an office at my law firm. It seemed fitting, since he and Norman had given me the confidence, not to mention an office and the financial backing, to open my own law firm 20 years earlier. Marvin would come into the office several times a week, ask everyone what they were working on, call his friends, and work on his book. He loved talking to the firefighters and cops who visited me. Naturally, he never mentioned the fact that he wasn't actually a lawyer. I will miss him walking into my office at 10 o'clock in the morning and asking me, "So, what are we doing for lunch today?" Admittedly, for my entire legal career, his presence and continuing advice were an enormous help to my business. Dad loved to make people laugh. He loved to tell and hear jokes, and especially loved teasing and playing practical jokes on his buddies. Surprisingly, he was actually terrible at telling jokes, but he never seemed to stop them. Sometimes he was truly outrageous. I remember so many of his antics, but I'm going to share one of my favorites. He used to love to tease my mother. And he never quite understood why it was okay that women could put lipstick on their lips at the dinner table in public. So one night at Rayburn Country Club, with 5 other couples at the table, he was ready. As the women all began applying their lipsticks, Marvin took out an electric shaver. All the guys thought it was hysterical, not the women, and especially not my mother. I want to express our family's appreciation, in particular to Lito and your brother Ray, my dad's attendants, who were so kind to Marvin during this past year. Thank you. Thanks also to Valerie Katsalis, who is somewhere here today, Dr. Yaffe's extraordinary medical assistant, whose patience and special attention really did add years of happiness to Marvin's life. Finally, Claudia and I want to publicly thank Phyllis. We often joke that if you and Marvin ever split up, we were going with you. For the past 22 years, well, for the past 20 years, you've been a wonderful wife. You took such wonderful care of our father, and for that, we will always be grateful. I know how much you will miss your Marv. He really adored you. You were the love of his life. As sad as I am today, I prefer to think about how Marvin would want us to feel, what he would say to make us feel better. First, I know, as I said, he'd be thrilled to hear the laughter in this room, and he would tell us with his big smile, I've had a wonderful life. I had a lifelong friendship and partnership with my brother Norman. I was happily married to 2 terrific women and had 2 children who loved me unconditionally despite my imperfections. I got the chance to develop meaningful relationships with my 5 grandchildren. I had great friendships with so many of you. The only thing I regret is that I was such a terrible golfer. But at least I got to play all 18 holes. And he would certainly want me to remind you all of his single biggest golf accomplishment, winning the 1972 Rayburn Class C trophy. If you come make a shiver call tonight, you'll actually see there's this thing in his apartment. He would close by saying, I've been incredibly lucky. I had 88 great years. Thank you for coming to say goodbye to me. Rest in peace, Dad. You really were my best friend. And judging by the turnout today, and if I can quote from one of his and my favorite movies, you're the richest man in town.